Alright, so I got the recording going. What was your question again?
On our log file, did you want us to list every file that was outside of a tar, or just that the user ID didn't include a tar, like for the S-hind?
It should only be a single entry. And in fact, let me go ahead and run that myself so we can see exactly what the text of that entry looks like. Alright, so I say extract assignments. Oops, I've got an old version here. Debug that. Yes. I think that's because I have an old version of this program. That's it. So just if there's no zip, no tar, nothing to extract. It's just the one line like that. So hopefully you all saw on Piazza that there were a couple things that were answered. One was just techniques for being able to whittle down that name into something that's just the user ID. And then also dealing with the archives that have spaces in them. And there you'll find a number of methods online. I have an affinity for this one just because it's simple. This read is going to read until it hits a new line, so I will contain the entire file name, including if it has spaces in it, and then just simply by ensuring that you're always including that in double quotes when you're using it in other commands, then that will preserve that. So take advantage of that if you haven't. Today's obviously a day dedicated to just having you work on this. What I would like to do is capture I want to capture your issues that you're currently working through. I mean, they don't have to be showstoppers, just in general. What are you working on? Give me some little thingy that you're trying to figure out right this moment. Yeah.
Log file.
Okay, so what about it?
Just figuring out how I want to approach if the username doesn't have a tar. If I'm going to be like searching through for a tar with a username, or if the first time I run into a CPP file, I'm just going to put something in there, then do a look into the file, and if the user's already been documented as not having a tar, then just skipping it. Like with sed or awk.
Alright, I'll talk about that in just a minute. What else? Now let me label this. Issues / what we're currently working on. What are you working on, Ivan?
Trying to think.
Well, you're thinking August?
Seeing if they have any comments in the comment file.
Right.
I guess
How to do what?
like write on a it's kind of the same as the log question, like how to write at the end of a file or logs.
Oh, to append?
Yeah, it's a kind
What else? If you're not looking at me, that means you're working on something, and I'm going to call on you to tell me what you're working on. Cody? How to get all of those, the initial extraction, you mean? How to get those whittled down and moved into the individual directories? Okay. What else? Yeah. Is it Alan?
Yes.
All right, Alan.
Trying to get the list of just files, not directories. I know there's a option -F for files, but I can't get it to work.
So you, let me see.
List file names only.
And what are you? What's the bigger picture? What do you? Why is that significant? What are you trying to do?
So that I can move those files into their respective directory.
Oh, so is your issue that you've created all the directories, now you need to move the files kind of thing?
I got one more.
Yeah, go for it.
I guess when we move the files into the directory, I guess how do we identify them?
Okay, once files are moved into their individual
Or do we have to traverse through them?
Griff?
I guess I have a question about how the output corresponds to what the script's actually doing. Because it seems to be saying that it wants to move all the files into the directories in one place. Then on a second pass, do the unzipping and unzipping. And I'm kind of like trying to do that all at once in mind.
I think, yeah, so that's a good point. Certainly the output has a bias on how I implemented it. So let me go ahead and say if you've got a different process you want to use, as long as the messages to the user are equally brief and informative. If you're doing it in a different order, that's fine. Or different, if you're slicing and dicing it differently, that's fine.
Okay, I wasn't sure if you wanted to implement that.
Yeah, I don't want to, you know, it's just a bias I didn't even think about consciously. But if you don't want to do it in like the separate passes I did, obviously that the output is biased towards that. If you're doing it differently, then that's fine. Any others you want to throw at me? All right, so let me go ahead and speak a little bit on each of these. How to determine whether a text file has user comments and how to extract them. I think grep and check $? To determine if comments are present. Use Google to find an awk recipe to extract text between two lines. So again, we have something like text. Oh, I should actually look at the comments. So let me do. So it's submission field, comments, files. So when it says find an awk recipe to extract text between two lines, you do the grep to make sure it's present, or at least to make sure that the default, the boilerplate verbiage is absent, right? That's what you're looking for. If this text is absent, then I know there's entries in the submission field. If this text is absent, then I know there are entries in the comments. So that's what you're using grep for, is to check for the absence of these expressions.
Or the student just hit enter a couple of times and it's just white spaces.
Then that's fine. It's possible that Blackboard is intelligent enough, and I confess I haven't checked it, but it's possible that Blackboard is intelligent enough that it will see that there's nothing but white space and go with the default. But I mean, there are variations on it, right? What if a student typed in, there is no student submission text data for this assignment? Right? But at that point, you know, there are only so many hours in the day, and by golly, you just want to extract this stuff and grade it. You don't want to go for some sort of ACM programming competition ninja stuff. So I think just searching for these is fine. Whatever's absent, just grab whatever's in between.
You can't override. Can you make a bash script, I guess, kind of like SQL injecting the comments or submissions for? Or would you always extract?
I don't think there's any exposure there, because your grep is going to grep would identify the absence of this text. Your awk script is basically going to grab from this point to this point and simply append it into a file, and there's no examination of the contents per se, right? So there's no chance of accidentally executing something. And then when you, as the instructor, go and look at that text file, you're literally just bringing it up in a text editor. So I guess the question is it possible to create some sort of script that executes when you bring it up in a text editor? And I think the short answer is no. So that is, let me number these. Log file. The way I did this one is I set a flag. So this is after files are moved into individual directory or user directories. Iterate through files, processing each. Create flag. Let me make the steps. I see where I'm going with this.
When you gave us that list,
You mean you're talking about this one?
yes.
Yeah, I think what I do is I dump it in with some sort of hard-coded name, and then I basically inspect that thing with the hard-coded name, and and I extract anything if it needs to be extracted, and then I remove it.
Instead of actually putting it into the folder.
No, it's put in the folder. So on my first pass, I'll create R center, and both of those will be dumped into R center. renamed. And then I go through each user directory. I go into the R center directory. I process all those files, and then I come out, and then I go into the R Galadro directory and process all those files, right? And so in doing it that way, that's where this is coming from, is after all files are moved into user directories, so it would be iterate through each user directory, create a flag, you iterate through the files, that one's indented I guess, if it's a set flag, when you're done iterating through files, check flag, if not set, add entry to log file. So if it's a zip or a tar, then you just trip the flag and there's no entry in the log file, right? So I think that's how I iterate,
And they're always in twos, no matter what.
so that it,
They're always in twos.
not necessarily, because they may not, if they didn't put in a tar ball or a zip file, they may have attached 3 CPP files, right? And so that flag would never be tripped. How to append at the end of a file. That one is command stuff. Append to this file.txt. So if you use 2 greater than symbols rather than 1, that'll append at the end of a file rather than overriding it. How to get the Blackboard named files renamed and into appropriate user directories. Piazza posts give some help on creating appropriate names. So I think, for instance, I think Piazza gives you enough information to extract the user ID. So how would I do it? Iterate through every file in original Blackboard zip, every file from, iterate through each. Extract user ID. If directory doesn't exist, create it.
Quick question, for the text file, if there's nothing in the text, or I guess you want us to include the text file into the folder with, even though there's nothing in it?
Yeah, because I do it in more than one pass. So the first thing I do is I move and rename every file into their appropriate directory.
Okay.
Right. So all the shine files, I create the shine directory, and then each file is moved into it, and including that text file. As I said, it's just some hard-coded value. It's some hard-coded value. And then when I go through each directory, I know what that hard-coded value is. It's like Todd's temporary text file.txt, right? And I just grep that to see if they're the Blackboard defined string, or the absence of the Blackboard defined strings. And whatever, regardless of the processing I do to it, the end is to remove that file. So I get everything moved and renamed, and then I process. So let me do that. Process files in a separate iteration. list file names only, not directories. I think you would use an if statement to see if the entry is a directory. What is that, the -d option maybe? I don't remember. Six. I think you would have for maybe it has spaces, so maybe do something like so you have something like that. And I think we already answered that one. So I'll leave it like that.
Oh, actually, the way you put it here is you put a readme.txt file in the user's directory only if the user submits a comment text or submission text.
Right, so that's what I'm saying.
You're not actually dumping the file.
No, I am. So let me go back to the zip file. Okay. So I create a directory called, in this example, I create a directory called project4, project_4. Or I don't know. No, I create a directory called another project because that's the name of the zip file, right? The first step is you create a directory with the same name as the zip file. I create another project. I cd into another project, and then I unzip the zip file that was provided on the command line. That's going to give me, inside another project directory is going to be all these files, right? So now I loop on all these files, and what I do is I grab the user ID for every single one. Grab the user ID, check and see, does a directory with that name already exist? If not, create that directory. And then I do a combination of move and rename, right? So then I have to, for these, I then have to do a little variable manipulation to strip this down to project4.tar.gz. And I move this, and remember I'm looping on every one, so let's say I'm looping on I. This is I. I move I into user ID / whatever the new name is without all the preamble crap. Okay. For these files, I move them in there also, but it ends up being move. I can't do it here. I end up doing move $I to user ID / some hard-coded name.txt. So now, when I'm done, once I'm done going through every one of these ends up in a directory with the user ID, right? So the only thing at that point, the only thing in another project, another project directory, should be a bunch of directories which correspond to user IDs. Now I create another loop, and that's where let me go to the notes. That's here. So now I create another loop where I'm looping on asterisk because I know the only thing in another directory are all the user IDs, directories with the same name as user IDs. So I iterate on every one of those, and the first thing I do is I cd into that directory so I can work in there. And then probably, I guess what I need to add here is the last thing I do is I cd back up. Now once I'm in the directory, now I can do something like this to interrogate each individual file. I can do a check in here, and I can say if $user file is equal to some hard-coded name.txt, then I've got the logic for checking if this file has user comments, and if so, I extract them using the recipe, right? And I extract them into whatever we call it, readme.txt.
Yeah, you also say that there's been a readme in the students.
So and that's fine. That's in here, right? You do the check, and if you do a grep and you check $?, the grep is going to return either 0 or non-zero depending on whether it found something. Okay, and if it didn't find anything, then you don't do anything. If it did find something, yeah, and then at the end, so then the very last step here is remove user file. Or you can hard code it, remove some hard coded name.txt.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So that initial loop when you're creating the directories with the username,
Yes.
so you're going to get the line with the text file and then a line with the tar and GZ. It's going to try and double create is it just going to skip over it? Like, go to the.
Let me go to the free request.
So so I'm gonna iterate through each one of these people, create a directory for them, and move their tar in. But it's gonna see alligator.txt and then alligator.txt.
It is, and in this case, it's going to see every one of these.
So in that LLS command, how can you specifically say to only look for like tar files?
You don't.
Well,
You don't say look only for tar files. You use specifically. Where are we? Are we on this first one?
Yeah.
This one? Getting them moved into the directories?
So all you do is check if the directory is.
Oh no, this is the second pass. Are you talking about the first? So this is second pass. First pass would have created directories and moved files into them. Let me see. Did I put that somewhere? Oh, all right. I thought I had. All right. So I'm sorry. What's the question then?
you had a good idea actually. You were just checking if the directories are
and I was just checking if the directory exists. If it doesn't, basically we would move it. Once it would grab the main.
Because it looks like the tars are fired out first.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Is for instance, you're processing that shind file several times, and that's exactly what I do. I have an if statement. If that directory doesn't exist, create it.
The other last thing to analyze if it's a text file or a tar file, because you have to rename the text file as you move it.
Yeah.
Is you do a you know how you would count the underscores? You just count the period, and then once you find out that that text is txt, then you rename that file as you move it.
Yeah.
I haven't done it yet, but I just got it.
Yeah.